setting that vision and that mission and staying the course. That is something that nonprofit does incredibly well. And I don't see that done quite as well in especially early stage startups or in the world of newly publicly traded organizations. There's a lot of reactivity. And so I think that there's lots to be learned from the nonprofit space from that perspective as well.
My name is Buddy Teaster, President and CEO of Souls for Souls and host of the Repurpose podcast. Each episode offers candid conversations with business leaders and entrepreneurs who share the ups and downs, wins and challenges they face along the way, and how they learn to overcome them. These are real stories of real people going from tailspin to tailwind, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. We're going to talk today with Meg Rivera, who has this incredible background from my perspective. She has been a business leader in the biotech, pharma, medical device space, which is all about innovation and speed to market. And there's this interesting mix between purpose and focus on financial viability that has a lot to do with Souls for Souls. So she brings a lot to the table as an operator, as an advisor, and her perspective on how each of these two worlds of the not-for-profit and the for-profit can learn from each other. And I think you're going to love this conversation. Meg Rivera, welcome to the Repurpose podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, buddy.
Great. Well, we've not met before, so this is going to be a fun conversation, I hope, for both of us, exploring a little bit about what we've seen, what we know, what we wish we knew, and maybe wish we'd known earlier. I know I could fill in a few gaps there. But let's start with a little bit about your background, because I think that's one of the things that sort of caught our attention was this deep experience around operating and being inside the machine, and now as an advisor, being on the outside with a different role. So how's that all fit together for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have spent pretty much the entirety of my career, 25 years now, which, boy, that's always hard to say, working in the life sciences industry. And I've had the privilege of working for some really stellar organizations, most recently focused in the space of women's health, but have had the opportunity to really connect with the purpose of a lot of these organizations. And now I have the luck to be able to be working on my own and serving as a strategic advisor to a lot of startup organizations and different leaders who are looking to really take a particular mission that they have, primarily within the healthcare space, and bring that to market effectively. And for me, it's really a culmination of all of the experience that I've had throughout my career, now being able to help pitch in and help founders realize their dreams of really impacting people's lives through healthcare delivery.
So Meg, I want to start right at the top with something that you mentioned, and I've heard in some of your other conversations about mission to market. There's a part of me that's a little cynical about that, not with you specifically, but just that kind of conversation generally. Working in the not-for-profit space here at Souls for Souls for the last almost 13, 14 years now, there are times when I think mission gets used in a way that has gone away from this kind of higher purpose. It's, a mission is not ROI, exit. I mean, maybe it is, but how do you grapple with when is it really a mission and when is that more like a marketing tagline or something not quite as noble as mission often sounds?
That's such a great question, buddy. And I think it's something that I've seen probably both sides of throughout my career and even now in the work that I do, in that, especially in healthcare, and in the US, but there is a cohort of folks who are working to truly advance developments in areas of unmet need. And oftentimes the support that they require is, how do they tell an effective story?
Yeah.
How do they truly connect what they're trying to do, perhaps bring something to market that treats a condition that has no other options in a way that's compelling enough for people to believe that they can make that happen? Because they do need to raise capital to bring a product to market. They do need to fund clinical studies. And part of that is telling the story about their mission to address an unmet need, and like it or not, why that makes financial sense to people who may want to invest in what they're trying to do. So
Meg, let me
I
push
do,
on that
I
for
do,
just a
yeah.
second.
Please. Yeah, please.
That sounds good, right? To like the mission
Sure.
person who really has this unmet need driving them. Does it matter? Like, can a person who is like, I'm in it for the dough. I have a plan, the market size, etc. I want to have a big exit. Does that make them more or less effective necessarily? And then the person who is, I'm here for the unmet need and the people that it serves? Or does it matters how you feel about it, but does it matter in the outcome?
It depends, is the honest answer to that. And I'll try to explain this as simply as possible. So if you have a laser focus and a 100% black and white focus on one or the other, I think you're probably going to run into issues either way.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a laser focus on an exit, on turning a profit, you are potentially going to lose strategic long-term focus. You're going to make decisions in the short term to increase valuation today. That isn't necessarily going to result in long-term profitable growth, but it will help you make $1 today.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a laser focus on a mission, and a noble one at that, bring a product to market to address an unmet need, but you are not paying attention to being able to tell the story about how it will create value for an investor, then you also will run into issues. So you may have a great long-term outcome if you stay connected to that mission, but in the short term, how are you going to keep that business running? And so I think if you're focused in one or the other, and that is that's the blinders you have on, I think the blinders are going to cause issues either end of the spectrum.
Meg, do you have any examples when you were in the business and now as an advisor of how you've worked with founders, leadership teams to sort of make sure that balance is consciously being sought? Because I can imagine someone's sort of patting you on the head and saying, yeah, but I'm here for the exit. I'm here for the capital raise. Mm-hmm. And the other way around, like, oh, it's, like we don't talk about the money. So how do you play a role in making sure that both things are considered at the same time and you don't get out of balance?
Yeah, so I've worked in both capacities in my full-time work as well as in my advisory work. And so I'll harken back to, I joined an organization that was launching a prescription digital therapeutic, the first of its kind. It was essentially a video game that treated cognitive impairment. We launched it in ADHD with the pediatric population. Fascinating product that was truly, a non-drug option for ADHD in children is groundbreaking. And that organization was entirely focused on the mission. And what I saw happen there was a challenge with ensuring capital runway, ensuring focus on actually bringing this product to market and following through instead of chasing the next iteration of it. And that focus on too far into the future ended up with some short-term challenges for them. Alternatively, working for a larger organization, I was working for a global women's health company for 3.5 years as my most recent full-time role in that, had a different issue. Women's health tends to be a long-term investment. And there was continued reactivity to share price and valuation, and lost track of that mission incredibly quickly. And so I've learned a lot seeing both sides of the spectrum there. I currently have been doing some work with a technology startup that is trying to do something very interesting, but I've yet to be able to tease out exactly what the differentiation or true value opportunity is to bring this all the way through to market, and really how to tell their story in a way that's going to compel investors to put some capital behind it. So there's just as many, I think, challenging stories as there are success stories in this space.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it depends.
Depends. Meg,
Yeah.
again, given that we're just meeting each other, do you have any experience in the not-for-profit world? Because these two things can be just as relevant. You know, how do you keep at Souls for Souls, it's core to who we are.
Of course.
And the tension is a great thing, but it's tension, right? I mean, you have to make trade-offs. So sort of putting the perspective from a not-for-profit, anything to share there that you think is different or maybe the for-profit world could learn from and vice versa?
Yeah, I think I've not worked directly in nonprofit. I've had some experience, interestingly, um, in the biotech and pharmaceutical space with charitable efforts and products
Mm-hmm.
that are very important to lower income countries that result in a lot of charitable work, but not nonprofit specifically. I do think there are a number of things that for profit can learn from nonprofit. One is operating model. I think that when you have the luxury of having really strong profit margins, which you typically do in the biopharmaceutical space, you can get a little sloppy with capital allocation, with with the cost of running your business. And I think that there's something to be learned from an organization that has to tightly manage those types of things. I think the other piece is really setting that vision and that mission and staying the course. That is something that nonprofit does incredibly well. And I don't see that done quite as well in especially early stage startups or in the world of newly publicly traded organizations. There's a lot of reactivity. And so I think that there's lots to be learned from the nonprofit space from that perspective as well.
Meg, I appreciate hearing that perspective. You know, for a long time, and I still think it's true, there's a lot of value there. Many people have said not-for-profits need to learn from for-profit. And I think that's true. Discipline, planning, I think that's true. Our board chair right now is a senior executive at Voya Financial, so big public company, lots of employees, lots of transparency and visibility. And I remember asking her recently how her experience working with the Voya board has influenced her governance role at Souls for Souls. And she's like, hold up. There's just as much my experience working on the board at Souls for Souls that influenced how we talk to our board. And I think that was really interesting, right? I mean, again, that's not a small private company thing, right? There's a lot of structure around that. And I just think it's important to say that for some of the reasons that you just mentioned, when the learning can go both ways, that's where I think if you're a board member or a volunteer, to be open to what you receive as well as what I'm bringing to the table kind of thing, which is also super important, that it's what you were saying with the mission and the laser focus on return. If you're only focused on one, you're probably going to miss the opportunities that are somewhere in blending those two things together.
Couldn't agree more.
I want to change gears a little bit, Meg, and I imagine some of your advisory work is CEO focused. And if you're talking about raising capital and expanding into new markets, scale is a big part of what you're helping companies think through. I want to stay focused on the CEO role for a second. What are some things that you've seen CEOs who do get the organization to scale that they've been good at? And what are the things you're like, ooh, the reason that we didn't scale was that CEO did X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, there's probably a few things that I've noticed. I think that focused execution, especially for early stage companies, is a critical priority of a successful CEO in that space. It's very easy to have a founder of an organization that's a true visionary, but who potentially doesn't have the experience on the operating side. And that's where you tend to see some CEOs struggle, is if you have the original founder who has so much passion for what they're doing, then try to translate that into flawless execution where you do have to make difficult decisions. You do have to make trade-off decisions. You do have to do some of the, what I would consider to be less sexy work, that's more grunt work. That's where you start to see some tension, especially at the CEO level, I think, as you move into the space, where I have seen tremendous success, especially if you're looking to raise capital or you're bringing a product, early stage product to market, is with CEOs who can kind of pull out of the weeds, put themselves in the shoes of the investment community, their patient population, of course, in healthcare, in the shoes of the clinicians that are treating. If they can actually, if they can come at it from the perspective of all of those key players, key stakeholders within their universe, that's when you can begin to break through, I think, and make more rapid progress than if you're just focused as a product person, kind of charging forward with what you've brought to market because you believe in it and it's your baby. I think you have to start to really expand your perspective to include stakeholders that maybe you hadn't thought of before.
Meg, on the first part about the execution, and then the put yourself in the shoes of your other stakeholders, that's pretty different. So do you? So there are unicorns who can go back and forth between those roles. Most of us are regular humans. So do you help CEOs think, okay, if we need flawless execution, you need a good COO with you? Or like, how do you navigate that? Saying, hey, you need to do both is hard. So how do you help the founder or the CEO navigate to the place where they're telling the story, they can be in stakeholders' shoes and hit the execution milestones?
Yeah, the execution milestones are challenging for someone who's the visionary, who's able to tell the story, who's really super, super closely connected to the product or the offering. From my perspective, sometimes it's a conversation about a CEO replacing themselves. Sometimes it's a conversation about bringing in the diversity amongst your leadership team to be able to focus on those key executional milestones. It could go both ways. There are going to be some instances where, you're a lean, mean operating leadership machine and you don't have the luxury of the capital to allocate to incremental executives to really balance this out. And those are the conversations, while they can be difficult, that have to happen about who's the right person to take this forward. I always say, if you have a startup company that has the founder as the CEO 10 years in, you may need to look at what's happening there. Because if to your point, it's not necessarily the same competencies, the same skill sets, et cetera, are not necessarily the people who invent the product that are going to be the most effective at taking it to market. There's a natural point in time when that baton needs to be passed to an operator. And I think there's a number of case studies where you have organizations maybe who waited too long.
Yeah.
And sometimes you see it in the results.
So I was going to ask you this question later, but now you put it on the table.
Sure.
One of the questions that we've asked a lot of the guests on the Repurpose podcast is sort of the transition. Like, when do you know you're done? We've had some people who have retired. We have some people who have made big transitions in industry, that sort of thing. And one of the common parts of that conversation is people do not know how to leave well, right? They're often good at starting things and running them, but the exit's a mess. In your example, it's one thing to say to a CEO, you need to replace yourself, because if you don't, the board will, right? I mean, that's how, if you've got investors and money at the table, that's how it'll go. So have you helped coach any of those conversations to say, I know this is your baby, but if you really care and believe in it, the best thing is for you not to be the CEO?
Yeah. Yes.
So how's that go?
It's It's it depends on the depends on the executive. I think that you've got I'll say this, it's never an easy initial conversation
Mm-hmm.
because nobody wants to believe that they can't shepherd their baby into the next phase of its life cycle, right? Nobody wants to admit that or own that out of the gates. I think it takes time and several conversations and reflection, like true time to reflect. I think for a leader to really wrap their head around why this is actually important.
Mm-hmm.
And when somebody is able to truly, I think, take a step back for a moment, shelve an ego, maybe get a little bit comfortable with the discomfort of someone else controlling something you have owned and
Yeah.
nurtured for so long. If you can get past those things, I think you get there. And I think it just takes continued conversation. It takes giving yourself as an executive enough time to not just process all of this, but really find the right person or people
Mm-hmm.
to take your vision to that next level. And I think if you're methodical about it, if you're thoughtful about it, it can work well. If it ends up in a situation, to your point, where the board is triggering replacing you, and now we've got many emotionally charged
Yeah.
conversations and processes, then it becomes much more difficult. That's why I think it's really important to potentially have those conversations sooner versus later,
Yeah.
even sometimes before it's time to make that change.
Yeah. So it's, a live issue for me at Souls for Souls. Like our board, as a part of their responsibility, talks about succession planning, and it feels far away. But at the same time, the question of, have I done what I can do here? I hear CEOs a lot say, we need a team that can take us to the next level, and that almost never includes them in that conversation. Like,
Yeah.
so I appreciate what you're saying, and I think that for folks listening to this who are in a leadership role, it's a tough question to ask, but answering it might make the difference between the organization succeeding or not, right? It's not a ancillary kind of thing. It's a core question.
It absolutely is. And I think on like it or not, right? When you're a CEO, there's not necessarily going to be a tremendous amount of people around you on your team who are going to want to have that conversation with you.
Yeah.
Right? It's that would be incredibly uncomfortable. I think when I work with leaders, I have the luxury of being an outsider
Mm-hmm.
who can share my objective observations and can do so without necessarily fear of tremendous repercussions, or I can do that with a level of comfort maybe that those who are working directly for a leader can't do.
So Meg, to get very practical for a second, if somebody's listening to this podcast and they don't have access to a Meg Rivera, any suggestions or guidance? Because you can't talk about this with your team. Maybe they want the job. Maybe they think you should go now. I mean, maybe they never want you to leave. Like, all those things could be at play. How could they maybe go about that? Time for reflection on that sort of stuff, but without the third party, it seems like that's a hard answer to get to.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, what I encourage people to do is to connect, especially in the founder community, connect with other founders at all stages of organization. So if I'm a founder in the space, talking to super early stage founders, ones that have potentially already transitioned and exited, getting the perspectives of and maybe wisdom from their experience can help to trigger some of those self-reflections, I think, and get leaders to start asking themselves maybe some questions that they wouldn't have asked themselves before. Like, when is the right time for me to start to consider if, there's a next step for this team? When's the right time for me to approach the board, et cetera. So I think there's a lot to be learned and a lot of power in the connectivity and the wisdom of
Yeah.
others who've been in your shoes. It doesn't need to be a coach. It doesn't need to be an advisor. It can absolutely just be people in your community, in your network who have
Yeah.
had similar experiences.
Okay. Great. The answer is almost always in the community. If you look around, that's so it's a great reminder that
Yeah.
that already exists for many of us.
Yes.
So change gears a little bit, but it is definitely related. I know you talk a lot about alignment, and this is one of the things to be aligned on is like what stage are we in? What does that need? Who do we need to be, et cetera. But again, it's one of those words you're like, I don't really know what that means. So how do you help leaders and leadership teams understand what alignment means and make sure that there is in the ideal case, explicit agreement on what that is?
Yeah. So alignment can mean a lot of things. I talk to leaders quite a bit about just alignment of their behaviors with their values, the work they're doing with their values, like staying connected on that front. When you start to talk about alignment within an organization, it gets a little bit tricky because sometimes it's hard to tease out if I, as a leader, set forth a vision and a mission and kind of a plan, a strategic plan, whether or not my team is truly aligned, in air quotes, right? Or if they are taking direction and marching forward with that direction. And so, what I do a lot of talking about and coaching on is creating an environment and a culture within your leadership team that breeds trust and that breeds what I would consider to be constructive conflict. In that you have a team around you as a leader that feels comfortable with challenging you, that feels comfortable with maybe asking difficult questions, and ultimately, as a leader, accepting that kind of dynamic amongst your team, I think is what gets you to a place where you're not getting this false alignment or just following of direction. You're really getting you're able to get true perspectives of diverse skill sets, competencies, and overall just kind of thinking across your leadership team. If you breed that type of dynamic within your leadership team, I think alignment becomes a less fuzzy term and perhaps is a little bit more genuine.
So Meg, the obvious follow-up question is how do you create that environment, right? Again, easy to say, I know myself, like, yeah, I want the feedback. And I think there's a reasonable expectation that people are thinking, I'm still going to be careful, still be guarded. So
Sure.
how do you coach the leader to make sure that it's not just talk, but that there is really some tools, some structure to get that feedback in a way that doesn't put anybody at risk?
Yeah. So it really goes back to some of the tenets of my personal leadership philosophy, which is centered around being human, because we all are. And I have three, I think, areas of focus that have helped me to create those types of environments on my teams historically. The first is about standing in truth. I believe very firmly in authenticity over performance. And I think that if you model that as a leader, if you are willing to be vulnerable, it creates a more comfortable space for people to show up as their true selves and makes them more comfortable in truly flexing, I think, what could be strengths that maybe would be hidden otherwise. The second is, I believe very strongly, and of course, leading from the front, setting the mission, setting the vision, but falling back to leading from the middle immediately following that. And what I mean by that is I am shoulder to shoulder with my team. We win, we lose. What they need is always at the forefront of my mind, and we're in it together. And I think that again, is creating a dynamic of trust and transparency and cohesion amongst the leadership team that can be really powerful. And then the last piece, and this is kind of a result of those two other things, is I believe in brave spaces, not just safe spaces. There's a difference. Safe spaces, psychological safety, inclusion, like those things are all incredibly important and they're a part of brave spaces. But modeling and encouraging your team to have these constructive and challenging conversations, to almost act as a board of directors for your own business, is something that I think is mission critical to getting that type of feedback and creating a space in which someone can be comfortable with speaking up without fear of repercussion.
So, Meg, this idea that you just mentioned of thinking about your leadership team like a board is really interesting. Like that, I've never heard that before. So maybe we can dig into that, because I can imagine that group having different priorities than the actual board, who's got that fiduciary responsibility. But I can also see some real power in there. So how do you help foster that idea? Because it's different being on the governance board side, and I don't mean that in like a bureaucratic way, but you have a different set of responsibilities than if you're running the show. So how do you put that into practice? I'm really intrigued.
Yeah, I think it's not always an easy thing to put into practice, and it probably goes back to the whole concept of alignment, right? But typically, in my experience, my leadership teams have, of course, had their own individual priorities. But as a team, we set our own goals and priorities as a business. So when I ran the US market for a very large global organization, that team, as a leadership team of 12 people, every single one of them was responsible for what were the goals and objectives of the entirety of the market, whether you worked on a priority piece of business or you worked in a support function. We all were tracking to and staying on top of what our goals were as a team. And any individual priorities should always ladder up to what you're trying to accomplish as a team. And I think driving some discipline around really getting specific about the work to be done and what you're going to be held to task on, and how that ladders up to this aligned or kind of cohesive set of objectives as an organization, is what helps truly make that happen. Because if one of our goals as a market is to drive a particular product's growth to X percentage year over year, sometimes it's difficult for other people on that leadership team to understand how they can impact that. But if you create this dynamic in this environment where you're able to stay connected across the board, and really set objectives that can ladder up to the overall priorities, I think it becomes a little bit easier to see and then, of course, to act on.
Yeah. That's what I'm taking away. I'm very interested in that idea. Because in a not-for-profit, you've got a volunteer board, right? So it's a different dynamic. But I know there are times when we think and talk through how will the board respond to that suggestion, proposal, direction. And at the same, I find myself saying sometimes, but what do we want to have happen? Like, we don't want different things than impact and success and all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting. It does change the conversation sometimes when we're making decisions with the board's approval in mind, which we need to do. But sometimes I think it's a little bit off, maybe just like 5 degrees from what if we didn't have that board, what would we do? So that's an interesting, to make it explicit could be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I think there's a lot of writing about right now, I know in our organization, we're a small organization, we have about 85 people, is we've got an executive team now of 6. We've got sort of our VP level, which we call our leadership council, which is about another 10. And then everybody else in the organization. And it seems sometimes like the middle is getting squeezed. Like, that's out there. Do you have any experience with that? Because the stress is real. Like we hear it from our leadership council. I'm sure you're hearing it. Like the executives are saying, our managers aren't doing the job. The manager, like, you're killing me here. I don't have the resources.
Yeah.
So when you talk about alignment, that's a big one, but there's a culture piece to that. There's a design piece to that. And I just love your perspective on what does it mean to be in the middle now?
Yeah. It's not an easy place to be. It's not an easy place to be. And I think one of the things that I have seen with a lot of more senior leadership teams when they're managing some of this tension that is really not going away, and I
Yeah.
don't see going away anytime soon, is making sure two things. Number one, the focus is really, really clear. One of the things that I think is really important in keeping my team's focus, that I believe has worked well in the past for me, and I see working well for other executives, is the team has got to be focused on what they can control. There is, especially under pressure, when you're feeling the squeeze in that middle management layer, it is very easy to get distracted and caught up in things that you can't control. And that is a time suck, an energy suck. And it is just, it can be really, really problematic. And I think if you're focusing the team on a really narrow set of priorities that have the most tremendous impact on the business, you are ensuring that on a daily basis, they're focused on what they can control, and then ultimately making sure that they understand their contributions to the overall priorities of the organization, the overall success of the organization, and you're able to celebrate that and highlight that. I think that those are the things that tend to be working the best when you're trying to address some of that middle level squeeze that's happening out there.
Yeah. I've been reading for a long time the Stoics, and Mike, our COO, gave me this coin. It says, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality, right? That what we can't control consumes us. But, they've been talking about for 2,000 years, you can only control the things that you can control. And that's what you should focus on. So it's a good reminder now, just like it was 2,000 years ago.
Totally.
I think that tells us something about the validity of that attitude. So I want to switch gears a little bit. We're coming close to the end of our time. But I think it is such an important part of what we're talking about here, of what you can manage, what you can control, how you show up. How do you take care of yourself personally? What are the things that you do when you're not advising in sort of your professional role that helps you show up for your family and also helps you show up for the people you're coaching and advising?
Yeah, great question. An area I'm pretty passionate about, because I do believe that I've learned quite a bit and become a better leader because of some of what I do for myself. I, a couple of years ago, got very much into running and athletics, and I used it as a tool in my personal life to deal with a challenging time when I was, struggling with infertility and some other, just challenges trying to start a family. And it helped me tremendously because it taught me things that I didn't expect it to teach me. Running did not, nor does it now, come easily to me. And so I've gotten really good at getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And now I love it in some weird way, and continue to try to kind of up my game as to what the next challenge is going to be and such. But running for me was really it. And I continue to do that today. I continue to push myself just physically. And I think it helps me. It's given me a lot of leaderships or lessons in leadership that maybe I didn't expect it to over time.
Yeah, good. I'm a runner too, so I'm with you on that one.
Excellent.
But I think, the broader idea of there are those things that sort of rejuvenate us that aren't, that are selfish, and that's okay. We should be okay with that, and also help us show up in other places, right? It's not, I'm sure it can get unhealthy. I've been there of being too focused on that. But when I think about the lessons, to your point, of how it shaped how I show up at work and with friends. It's
Yeah.
finding that thing is really important for all
Agree.
kinds of reasons. So
Agree.
maybe close with one last thing. So I think you have a kid, right? So you got through the fertility
do.
thing, which
Yes.
I can only imagine was hellishly hard. You're not in a day-to-day role. When you think about, this will be our closing question. 20 years from now, what do you want to remember about this moment? Not so much what do you wish were different or where do you want to be in 20 years? Also interesting questions. But 20 years from now, what do you want to remember about this moment for you and your family?
Oof. That's a compelling question. For me, this moment, and I've done a lot of reflecting on this just as I've had, a career transition and such in the last year. This moment for me has been about, and my daughter is just 20 months old, so she's relatively
That's still
new to
very
this world.
new. Yeah.
But yeah, but having her really shifted my perspective, and it has made me so much more committed to identifying and sticking to what truly is meaningful to me. And so this moment in time, I believe I will look back on and say, this was the moment in time where I felt like I found my true purpose. And I was able to do some really impactful work while also doing my absolute best to do my most favorite job I've ever had in my whole life, which is being a mom. So I would say that.
Given that you had no advance notice of that question, that was a beautiful answer. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Meg, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks for sharing some of that experience. And this is, I think, one of these great examples that we sort of talked about of where the for-profit and not-for-profit world can learn from each other. I think Absolutely. You could have taken all the things out about being in the health industry. I could have put myself in your shoes and we would have still had this conversation. So thanks for doing that and sharing your expertise and time.
Definitely. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the Repurpose Podcast with me, Buddy Teaster. You can follow the show at buddyteaster.com/podcast, and you can learn more about what we do at s4s.org. If you like this content, please share, rate, and review our episodes wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And until next time, I ask you to ask yourself, what's your why? And how will discovering that help give your life a repurpose?